in the world of sports, it is just as important to have a strong mental game as it is to have a strong physical game. You'll see a lot of players with so much physical talent and ability, but they break because they're not well conditioned mentally. So today we're diving into mental conditioning by bringing on an expert who has over 19 years of experience in this field, working with elite athletes and elite coaches. I'm talking the Nick Sabans, the Jimbo Fishers, the Kirby Smarts, and many others. He's worked alongside Russell Wilson for quite a few years now. He knows what he's talking about. He even wrote a book about it. It's called It Takes What It Takes. So I want you guys to pay attention, listen up, learn from this guy about the way that he helps athletes and coaches and programs with mental conditioning, because it's not just for athletes, it's for anybody. And you're going to love this episode of The Game Time Guru. So,
what time is it? Game time! Woo!
If you're sick of the mainstream sports outlets, well, so was I. So I started my own show. I'm Shane Larson, and this is The Game Time Guru. It's different than other talk shows. I'm providing a panoramic view on sports so you can see them through a different lens. So buckle up and let's go.
What's up, everybody? Shane Larson here, the host of the show. Before we get started into the interview, I just want to remind everybody to leave me a review on Apple Podcasts. We have that, goal to get to 100 reviews. We've had over 47,000 downloads of the show, so please make sure to leave me a review as we try to get to 100 and we continue to break barriers with the show. Thank you to all the supporters and everybody who's been following the show. And if you're new, welcome aboard. Hit that subscribe button so you can catch all the interviews coming forward as well. Hope you guys enjoy. What's up, everybody? Welcome out to the Game Time Guru podcast. And you know this by now. This week we're going to be talking about mental conditioning, and what better way to do that than to bring on a world-renowned mental conditioning expert, a strategic advisor. He's Russell Wilson's mental coach. His name is Trevor Moawad. He's also the author of It Takes What It Takes, How to Think Neutrally and Gain Control of Your Life. We're going to talk to him and talk a little bit about his book today. Trevor, thanks so much for joining the show.
You bet. My pleasure.
Man, it's an honor to have you on here, Trevor. Just a quick backstory here. I was introduced to your book about 6 weeks ago. It had been out for a couple of weeks, I think. It was somewhat new, I thought. But my friend at work had told me, "Hey, Shane, I know you have your show. It's a pretty well-known show now. I know you love sports. You're going to love this book." And he wasn't wrong. I grabbed the book. My eyes were glued to it. I took crazy amounts of notes while I was reading through it, and I was just super inspired by your work. So I appreciate you, man. Thank you.
You bet. My pleasure.
Now, Trevor, let's get to know you a little bit better as far as what you're doing. You're a mental conditioning expert and strategic advisor, but some people may not fully understand that because in the sports world, it's kind of not talked about a lot, I guess, if you will. So, let's talk about where you started in your sports world and how you got into this field of work.
Yeah, I think for most, first of all, Shane, it's a pleasure to join the show. Glad you read the book. I think after 19 years in the sports world and kind of working behind the scenes, it was neat just to bring some of the concepts, that are largely sort of mirror the self-help industry. They're just, basically taught differently, in a way that is more palatable, to an audience that's much different than a business audience or a yoga audience, or even many people that might be listening to the show that are looking to get better. Athletes are already at the top of their game, and they're the best of the best, but they have really significant expectations that they got to adhere to in order just to survive in their sport, let alone be good in it. I think it's the best way to sort of describe the field, to some degree, is kind of Tony Robbins. People kind of know Tony Robbins as a motivator, as an educator. Obviously he's, probably more connected now with wealth and other things, but your job, if you work in the sports psychology or mental conditioning industry in sports is to provide value to the athlete, to the coaches, in whatever way you can strategically. And so, we have a basic kind of core way that I facilitate and teach, that the book kind of drives forward, which is, we're not ambassadors or teachers of the power of positive thinking. We don't subscribe really to mindfulness or meditation. Not that those don't have value. We just look at those as very advanced concepts. We focus at a much granular, more simple level, the minimization of negativity, learning how to be neutral thinkers. And then I think, for me, a lot of my exposure, I was raised in Tacoma, Washington. Lived my first 17 years. My dad, in the mid-'70s, left teaching and coaching up in at Clover Park High School in Lakewood, Washington, and went into this field with a company called the Pacific Institute, where they started working with businesses like Boeing and IBM and NASA that were basically trying to find ways to get more out of an 8.5-hour day relative to their employees, and they believed that there was some training that could really help them. And then my dad would go on to be the president of the National Association for Self-Esteem, as well as one of the first authors of the book series Chicken Soup for the Soul. So I had a lot of education early on. I went through my own adversity, where health-wise, which sort of cemented the power of my mind, in my own journey. And I think that then I ended up at IMG Academy for 12 years, 1,000 high school athletes, many of the best athletes in the world that live there in Florida, and that allowed me as the director of training to oversee all aspects relative to human performance, as well as teach sports psychology and mental conditioning. So it's crazy. A kid from Tacoma, Washington. I was a good athlete in school, played 2 sports in college, but to be where I've been, to be a part of 8 national championships, games, to be a part of winning 5, Georgia, Alabama, Florida State, U.S. Army Special Operations Command, Russell Wilson, to name just many of the neat people that I've been able to meet along the journey. Pretty cool for a kid from the Northwest.
Man, I love hearing that, though, man. And I'll tell you, Trevor, you're not the first person I've heard that's at an elite level from Tacoma. My very favorite basketball player growing up, he was my role model, which is I idolized him. His name was Roberto Bergerson. He actually went to Boise State, which is my alma mater, but he was from Tacoma, Washington. And then he ended up going to the NBA, and he was on my show, too, sharing his story. So Tacoma must be producing some top-tier talent out there, man. I tell you what. So, Trevor, you talked about it. So you're at IMG Academy. You had quite the experience to get to that level. I mean, and I would encourage everybody to read the book so that you can learn more about it in detail. But, you go to IMG Academy, you have this experience as an athlete, like you just talked about before. And then you go over to Jacksonville to the Jaguars, and you mentioned in the book an experience with Fred Taylor, and that was kind of like a tougher athlete to work with. Can you give a little bit of insight without giving away the house, what you had to work with Fred?
I think in general, and this is where I think if you're look, there are organizations that have a sports psychologist. You have a problem, you go see him. Mental conditioning is a little more proactive. It's a little more strategic. There are some sports psychologists, I'm sure, that do it exactly the same way I would do it, and they have the clinical background. But, for the most part, my population, so, like last year I was with the Major League Baseball team, and I know, like, the first time I get up, the GM introduced me, the president, team president introduced me, and then I get up. I know those 78 players are looking at me like, fuck this guy. Like they don't want to listen to me. They haven't had a good experience with it. Everything has been about breathing, being told to be positive after they're 0 for 11, and so, the vast majority, I think, of the industry in and around mental conditioning and sports psychology and what's been taught, as world-class athletes, they're not buying it. So, Fred Taylor was from Belle Glade, which is a really tough part just south of Miami. And, and he had played for the Jaguars in his first year, at 7 or 8 straight games with 100-yard games. And, but he lived a rough life kind of off the field, didn't know how to take care of his body. And, by the end of his 3rd year, he was almost out of the league. And the coach knew that if they didn't fix him, that they were going to have a real problem relative to the success of the team. And, they tried some, he wasn't going to meet with a clinical psychologist. He wasn't going to do any of those things. We had been at IMG Academy. My business partner at that point, Chad Bowling, who's now the director of mental conditioning for the New York Yankees, And we kind of ran our football program, and we would meet with these guys, getting them ready for the Wonderlic, just going through, this is what day one looks like of the NFL Combine, this is day two, and then, talking with them, having good relationships, but being very normal while still providing meaningful information that revolves, around that mental space. So I think that was, so they had heard about us, and Tom Coughlin hired, ultimately gave us the opportunity, and Fred was really challenging in the sense from the outside perspective, but basically the guy just wanted to play a full season without an injury. That was really his goal. He wanted to play a full season without an injury, and then as the book kind of goes into, we went through a lot of reasons why he wanted to do that, to really establish, motivation is two parts. It's motive and it's action. And we wanted to, the motive, like, why do you want to play 16 games? Obviously there was a financial component. There's a personal component. He'd been nicknamed Fragile Fred. That really bothered him. And then you do the action, like, okay, what's the plan that's going to give him a chance? And what are the behaviors that he's got to, adapt, and really understand as to why he hasn't been able to do it his first three seasons. And so we kind of go into that whole experience. And I'm a big believer, Shane, in that your behavior precedes your success. Russell Wilson, his first 4 years at $280,000 a year at the league minimum, obviously as a mid-round draft pick, he was already behaving like a $36 million a year highest paid athlete in the history of football, which he is now. And he was doing that, by far before he ever got to the NFL. And then even when he got to NC State and they tried to move him to defensive back, there's a way that you can kind of go about your business to allow you to succeed. People give far too much credit to aptitude, not enough to behavior. People put way too much emphasis in emotions and not enough in their behavior. I think, again, whether you're going through cancer, whether you're, trying to do a Zoom meeting right now, whether you're navigating your business, whether you've been furloughed, whether you're in a world-class athlete, there are a set of things that you can do that will allow you to be successful. And it comes down to, objectively, you either do them or you don't. And that's the whole idea of the book. It takes what it takes. There's nothing wrong with not doing it. I don't mind average people, as long as average people understand that average people become average through average behavior, not average aptitude. And I think really good performers, I was a high school teacher for 4 years, and I think a great teacher, the way that they lesson plan, the way that every 10 minutes they're switching up where they're standing in the room and activities versus talking versus visuals, like all of that stuff is you're not just born with that. A good marriage, a good relationship is a set of behaviors, making the time to communicate. It's not a gift. We might have more gifts in some areas than others, and there may be truth to that. But, I think far too many people look at athletes in that world and say, I can never do that, when really the truth that they need to explore is, I don't want to do that, and not wanting to be good, not wanting to be exceptional. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's out there for everybody.
Totally, man. And what I really appreciate about you and your story and everything is just how real you are with everything. And in the book too, Trevor, you go into detail with a lot of stuff, and you got a little bit vulnerable in there, which I really appreciated because I related to a certain extent when you were talking about, going through a life-changing experience just a few years back, and you mentioned this, quote unquote, you stated this, it's like almost like a supersize me type thing that you went through, this little experiment, if you will, experience, if you will, regarding consumption of negative content, negative media, just negativity, because you preach all the time, and this is the same for, like you have just been talking about, for the sports world, for the business world, negativity there's nothing good that comes from it. It's always going to be right. Like it's negative 100% of the time. So you're trying to eliminate negativity and think neutrally, but you talk about
like the impact of consumption of negative media. Can you elaborate a little bit on that experience that you went through? And you don't have to go, like, they can read it through your book, but just kind of like what the impact of negative consumption had on you.
I mean, I just, I had a year where a lot of things didn't go my way. I mean, it had a couple of years that have provided, unique challenges. That's for sure. And divorce and other elements and those things just happen from time to time, and you have to understand, you got to own it, you got to play your role, and you got to, all those things. But I had a friend from the special operations community that kind of right in the middle of all this, just said, this might be a unique opportunity for you to really, while you're in the middle of all this adversity, start, one of my, beliefs is not only what we say out loud, has a huge effect on us. If it's negative, it's 4 to 7 times more powerful than if it's positive. And if we're verbalizing it, it's 10 times on top of that. So negative statements are 70 times more powerful, have 70 times the impact on us as if we didn't say them at all. So learning how to not externalize things is externalize negativity, complaining, frustration, verbalizing that. You can think it, but the verbalization of it's really powerful. But there's also a secondary port, which is consumption. And it's the consuming of music, it's television, it's the people that we're choosing to be around. Sometimes we can't control that. So while I was in the middle of this adversity, I wanted to see how, if I could overcome negativity myself, based upon, whatever the sports world's best brain trainer is from Sports Illustrated, my education, the way I was raised, all those things. And so 4 hours, for 4 hours a day, I just consumed, I picked the worst TV news station for me and got 90 minutes of that. And I listened to an hour of, heavy metal, Anthrax, all those elements all through my ears. And then, I did 90 minutes of new country music, which at the end of a divorce, going through like new country. And I was never allowed to listen to country, watch the nightly news, or listen to rhythm and blues or any of that stuff growing up. My dad just, my dad loved the melodies of country and all the elements and things, but he just, he firmly believed that they were really negative and brought that in. So, but after, I did a 30-day experiment, and after 26 days, I was almost in a state of clinical depression. We monitored, how many songs I listened to, what I did, and then we monitored all my text messages. My tone had completely changed. My ability to see forward had completely changed. I could kind of only see my life backwards. And so it was a difficult thing to go through, and I took probably 3-4 days just to recover from it psychologically. I was, I had somebody at a very high level facilitating the plan for me. So we talk about that, and I think, well, how does that equate to now? Normally in life you have work and you got these other things, and if you're a dumbass, in my opinion, that consumes a lot of negative stuff, you just do it either because you're unconsciously incompetent, or you like just, negative stuff. Now you don't have that balance. So, and plus you feel like you got to be educated. You got to kind of know what's going on, which obviously to some degree, for sure, you do right now. So, we've got people 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours, 11, 12 hours a day, watching press conferences and briefings and all those things, which, you have to ask yourself really, what actually is helpful for me? What do I actually need to know? And, as a great athlete, it's always compelled to do. And, negativity is undefeated. And we never really worry about changing the thinking of it. Eventually, second, third year working with athletes, we'll focus on the thinking, but really the externalization and the consumption. Because I always, for the most part, control what I consume, and I certainly always control what I say. And if there's people listening, well, I need to. What do you want me to want me to keep it in, and not say it out loud? Yes, you would benefit by far more by keeping it in than by saying it out loud.
It's so awesome you just said that, by the way, because when I was in that chapter of the book talking about the verbalization, you gave specific examples, one of Bill Buckner, one of Pete Maravich, and I thought it was crazy. The one of Pete Maravich, guys, like, listen up here, everyone. Like, he specifically said, I don't want to play 10 years and die of a heart attack at age 40. Well, then I encouraged my listeners after I read that chapter, said, hey, I read this in this book. Go check out what happened to Pete Maravich. And just like, call it coincidence, call it what you will, but like, there is some validity to what you're stating. I mean, like you just said, negativity is undefeated. Like, stop verbalizing your negative thoughts. I love that piece. So I'm glad that you just mentioned that here. And, again, guys, go read this book. It's called It Takes What It Takes, How to Think Neutrally and Gain Control of Your Life. You'll hear more of Trevor's story about his 30-day experiment that he just went through, that he talked about right now, and how he kind of, in a sense, went into clinical depression after 26 and a half days, which you mentioned is when it finally broke. Now, let's talk about something positive real quick to wrap up the show, Trevor. I mean, I want to see, I love the fact that you bring this aspect to the athletic world as well as the business world. I mean, you've worked with tons of people, and you work with so many awesome figures. You already mentioned 9 national championships you've been a part of. Russell Wilson's obviously won a Super Bowl, lost another one in dramatic fashion, but you work with him directly. And, I'm curious, you've been around a lot of amazing games, a lot of amazing teams, a lot of amazing coaches, and you reference some of them in your book. And I'm curious, do you have a favorite moment, sports moment, not as an athlete, but as a mental conditioning expert, like a strategic advisor? Do you have a favorite moment, whether it be a national championship or the Super Bowl with Russell Wilson, or is that too hard to answer?
It's interesting because I'm not a huge sports fan. I probably watch more HGTV than ESPN. And I think that's allowed me. I mean, I'm competitive. Obviously, I'm a college basketball and soccer player. Grew up loving basketball, but for the most part, I don't consume a lot of it. But I think as I've gotten older, particularly kind of now being in my 40s, I basically I was spoiled early on as the mental conditioning coach at Alabama, 35 days a year. And we won so much. And then Florida State, we won so much. But when I got to Georgia, I was like, okay, I'm going to try to enjoy more of this. So there's been moments. I think for me, I remember, so I went to school at a great small private school called Occidental College, which is right next to Caltech and Harvey Mudd and Pomona Pitzer and Claremont. These are really good small colleges in Southern California. And we were 3 miles from the Rose Bowl. Well, my 4th Rose Bowl working as the sports psychology consultant at Georgia, I was like, I got to embrace this. I'm a Division III college athlete, and I'm in my 4th Rose Bowl on the sideline right in the middle of it, navigating. And I play a specific role for these teams in terms of my program, the things that I teach. My job with my players is facilitating all of our reminders to our quarterbacks, all those different things during the game. So when I went into that last Rose Bowl, I really wanted to try to every now and then just enjoy it. So I got out there early before the game. We were getting killed at half, and the book kind of goes into that. But there was a specific moment, with about 50 seconds to go in the game. We had come back and in dramatic fashion and gone ahead, and then Oklahoma with Baker Mayfield went back ahead. And anyways, at this point, it was 45-45. We had just scored to tie the game. And Baker Mayfield had the ball with a 3rd and 2 at about their 40. And I'm leaning down on my knees right on the edge of the sideline, right between Kirby Smart, our head coach, and Mel Tucker, our defensive coordinator, kind of on my knees right between them. They're up to me. And it's a beautiful night in Pasadena, Southern California, 103,000 people in the Rose Bowl, 30 million people watching, and I just kind of took a deep breath and said, this is incredible. I need to make sure I enjoy this. We ended up getting the stop, going to overtime, and beating them in the second overtime. And then so that moment in particular, I really remember just kind of embracing it. Obviously, there have been incredible moments with Russ, and Russ, it's not the team, but it's with his family in the box, and Sierra and all the elements. But I loved, working with Texas A&M women's soccer, and the U.S. under-21 women's national team, or the U.S. under-17 boys soccer team with Freddie Adu and Josie Altidore and Michael Bradley and those kids. Frosty Westring, the football coach at Pacific Lutheran University, had a great saying, make the big time where you are. I think for me, when I was a teacher coaching high school women's soccer, high school, men's and women's golf, under 15 B club team, they got my absolute best. And I never really focused on the next step until I was good where I was at. And I think that allowed me eventually to evolve. And then, at a young age, I got a lot of exposure to some of the best athletes in the world because I worked at IMG Academy and I was confident and knew what I was doing. And I was probably too young at that point to be with Serena or to be with a lot of them, but there weren't other people to do it, and I was able to execute it. And so, I got a world-class education. I have a master's in education with an emphasis in social science, but what I learned from experience, what I think this book tries to teach is, infinitely more than I, could have ever learned in a classroom.
Oh, man, that is so cool. It's just so cool for someone like myself. I'm in my early 30s, and I'm a sports fanatic, but I just listen to the people you've been around. In the book, I was reading it, and I'm like, man, this guy is amazing. Like, you're living a life that I would love to live, but you're the expert. I'm not. So there's a reason you're where you're at, because you've put the work in, you've utilized your skill set, and you've attacked it. And then you've even practiced what you preach, like you mentioned in your experiment, when you've gone through some hardships in life. I think it's amazing. And then that whole description of the Rose Bowl against Oklahoma, that's amazing. It's just so cool to hear like the experiences that you've had. Now, the last thing I'll ask you, Trevor, is just to kind of like inform my audience, who the majority are either athletes or former athletes or someone who's involved in the world of sports. I mean, you've talked about it before, how in sports, really the only thing that changes is your environment, right? And that's so true. Like the main thing that changes in sports is you go to a different stadium, the weather might be different, the crowd's different, coaches are different that you're playing against, but that's the environment's what changes. But so what are some of the exercises, or I guess the things that you guys do with the athletes to help them focus on the quote unquote now, so they can focus on what's happening at the moment and just take advantage of the moment and think neutrally?
Yeah, I mean, I just think, typically we want everybody to understand the fundamentals of thinking. And so, like what my own words, how my own words affect me versus other people's words, what I watch versus, like what I'm listening to, how I'm teleological by nature. I move towards setting goals. Like, we do a really good job of getting a baseline of information and education to all of our players. We do a lot of case studies. We'll study Usain Bolt. We'll study Tiger Woods. We'll study Drake. Why does Drake have 13 number one hits versus other people who seemingly had the same talent, didn't make it? Exercises. We have, cognitive related exercises where we track numbers and we introduce crowd noise, and then we have races to identify numbers and colors and different types of things, Stroop pattern recognition tests that we'll do for 5-10 minutes as a part of, what we're doing, just to make the point that I can only sustain one thought at a time, the law of substitution, and I control that thought. And when my mind is focused on knowing what that thought is, that's where it goes. Like, Russell enters a game focusing in really 3 areas: great balance, great fundamentals, and being engaged. Those are the things that are going to allow him to be successful. So he's going back to those words, picks a spot in the stadium, locks into it, and then, as he gets on the stadium, it says, I am here, reminds himself like where he's at. And then we use trigger words like built for this, I'm like, reminding like I'm built for during the Super Bowl in that moment. Confidence is not bullshit. You have to earn it. And it's not words. It's the combination of the fact that you think you can execute your job. And, so that's kind of, it's kind of an important thing to understand. But I think that it's the more that you have a general understanding of how your mind works, how you influence it, how other people are impacting it, then that's going to allow you. If you're an ultra marathoner, I spend a lot of time with Under Armour. When we get older and training's our sport, right? We're not competing anymore in the same way, but training. How do we navigate, put our plan in place, set our goals? To go out and compete, whether we're hiking, or if you're like me in your 40s now, and I'm an avid hiker. I love going up into the mountains, and I'm not trying to beat anybody for it. I'm going to go up there for 90 minutes or 2 hours. And I'm going to exercise, and I have certain things, and I'll do yoga, just to focus on my core and other elements and things like that. But I'm not an ultra marathoner. I'm not David Goggins, or any of those types of people. But I just think the more you understand what it is that's going to allow you to succeed, then you choose on a day in, day out basis, whether or not you're going to do those things. And then you have to understand really it's not a choice if you want to be good. You're either going to do it or you're not. So, I think that's what I've seen, and to objectively in my 19 years, nothing happens by accident.
Oh, it's so awesome, man. And once again, Trevor, we appreciate you joining the show. Can you tell us what's in the works for Trevor Moawad? What do you got going on moving forward, and where can we find you?
Yeah, so I'm in the deeply embedded in the sports world. You're a lot different than the Gary Vaynerchuks and those. Social media is not really a part of what we do, but the last 7-8 months I've joined Instagram, so at Trevor Moawad. I've got Twitter at Trevor Moawad. Russell Wilson and I have a company called Limitless Minds. Really cool. We've integrated some very interesting concepts into the business world, working with some of the top businesses in the world. I actually just finished a webinar for one of the top pharmaceutical companies in the world a few hours ago. That's thinkbig-gofar.com. Thinkbig-gofar.com. That's Limitless Minds. But you can find me under Trevor Moawad. It takes Trevor Moawad. It Takes What It Takes is available everywhere. And it's been great. I for somebody that doesn't have a big name, for us to be a Wall Street Journal national bestseller and moving the needle. And I think the idea of neutral thinking without trying to force positivity and learning how to minimize negative, I think it's, unfortunately in many ways timely right now because I think so many people, are really struggling to steer themselves clear of, the negativity that's out there. I mean, I haven't watched anything other than Netflix in 23 days. I mean, I haven't turned on the TV, including ESPN, because ESPN will run a ticker and it'll say this person died, this person died, this person died. And that, for me, strategically, there's just no upside in that. I get my information every Monday and Friday from an NBA team I work with that says, this is the truth, this is what's going on, this is what's happening in Southern California, this is what you need to do, this is how you need to stay safe, this is how you need to be a citizen. So I live in the real world, I know what's going on. I don't get any other information than that.
Man, I appreciate you letting us know that as well and telling us where you're located. So we'll make sure to put those in the description here. And guys, once again, go check out the book, It Takes What It Takes. You've heard me talk about it probably 10 times now in the last 2 weeks, and I don't care because I think it's amazing. Trevor, once again, appreciate you joining the show. Thank you so much. It's been an honor and a blessing.
All right, take care, brother.
Guys, thanks so much for listening to this episode with Trevor Moawad, the author of It Takes What It Takes. And I encourage you guys, once again, to go and read this book. Now, if you guys enjoyed the episode, again, give me 5 stars. Go leave me a review and tune in. Subscribe to the show so I can bring you more content in the coming weeks. Take care, guys.